Good evening, everyone. Welcome to this meeting of the Executive. My name is Councillor Paul Follows, and I'm Leader of the Council and Chairman of the Executive. Before we get started with our business this evening, I would like to invite the Executive to stand and observe a minute's silence in memory of Councillor Peter Isherwood, who sadly passed away last night. I'm sure I speak for everybody when I say our thoughts go out to his family at this point. The flag has gone to half-mast at the Berries in honour of Councillor Isherwood. Okay, on to the business of the meeting. Apologies for absence. Louise.
Thank you, Chairman. We've received apologies from Councillors Merriweather and Townsend.
Thank you. Executive members, are you happy for me to agree the minutes of the 8th of March? Thank you. Declarations of interest, Louise.
Thank you, Chairman. The following declarations of interest have been advised prior to the meeting. The leader has declared a registrable interest in item 15 as a member of Godalming Town Council. Councillor Rivers declared a registrable interest in item 15 as a member of Godalming Town Council. Councillor Williams declared a registrable interest in item 15 as a member of Godalming Town Council. Councillor MacLeod and Councillor Mirrlees both declared a registrable interest in item 15 as a member of Farnham Town Council.
Thank you very much. Any further declarations from the floor? Okay, seeing none. Any questions from the public, Louise?
None received, Chairman.
And questions from members?
None received, Chairman.
Thank you. In which case, I'll start with the leaders and portfolio holders updates. Very short update from me this week. Right now, well, not quite right now, but later on this evening, Guildford Borough Council will be debating and hopefully agreeing the draft heads of terms for the inter-authority agreement between Guildford Borough Council and Waverley Borough Council. Waverley Borough Council will be considering the same document at its full council meeting on the 26th of this month, where hopefully we will also approve the document going forward, which will allow us to move to the next stage of the Guildford-Waverley collaboration through the appointment of the joint management team. The only other meeting I wanted to flag this week was that yesterday I attended a meeting, officers from Surrey County Council, officers here from Waverley, as well as 4 of the town clerks from the larger towns or villages within Waverley to discuss Ukraine and refugees. Very pleased to see some of the fantastic community efforts going on to support refugees coming into the borough, particularly in Farnham, where we're able to share a lot of good work and good practice amongst the different communities of Waverley. It also set up some much needed channels in order to make sure that where we have got support and where we have got people coming into the country and to the borough, we're able to help them and support them as best we can. More on that, I'm sure, in the next few days. But we are now starting to see through the family scheme, at least, Ukrainian refugees enter the borough, and we hope to see some entering via the other scheme that was set up by the government in due course. Slightly slower on that because of the complexity of the visas, as we're finding. Waverley isn't able to do any of the things it needs to do until the Home Office have issued the visas, and so from our point of view, we do have to wait for that process. But I would just advise any residents that are watching this, it can be very slow, and we're finding that it is quite difficult to get status updates on individual applications on individual refugees or their families. So please hopefully be patient, and if you've got any concerns, please do flag them to your local town, parish council or to Waverley. I'll now head on to the rest of the executive, starting with Councillor Clark.
Thank you. At my last portfolio holder update, I mentioned that the Farnham board meeting was taking place on the 25th of March. The Farnham Board is the supervising body of the Farnham Infrastructure Programme. I'm glad to report that this board meeting was one of the most optimistic I've been part of. In addition to the HGV ban and 20 mile an hour speed limits, work could start later this year on some new town centre options, such as providing a cafe culture by widening the pavements in Castle Street and Downing Street. Consultation and alterations to the gyratory system will take place this summer as soon as designs have been created and traffic modelling completed. At the beginning of the board meeting, I made a statement about the latest rail bridge strike in Recklesham, which I will quickly summarise here. On Thursday, the 17th of March, the latest and perhaps the most horrific bridge strike took place, when a large truck carrying a container struck the bridge and fell over onto its side and onto the pavement. It could be argued that the danger this bridge poses to the residents of Recklesham is not really a matter for the Farnham Infrastructure Programme. But if the Recklesham bypass is not going to happen in the short term, then there must be some focus on the bridge, which is a disaster waiting to happen. I'm sure we all agree that the priority of any highways authority is to provide roads and footpaths that are safe, especially when the danger, such as this bridge presents, has been identified year after year, and the measures taken so far have not stopped these strikes. So far, we've been very lucky with the bridge strikes, but each and every strike, the odds of a fatality increase. So I urged those responsible to apply some creative thinking, backed up by the necessary funding. Finally, I'm pleased to report that Tom Horwood, our Chief Executive, will be raising the matter with Katie Stewart, the Head of Transport and Infrastructure at Surrey County Council, the responsible highways authority. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Councillor Clark, and absolutely, I'm amazed nothing more serious has happened thus far. Councillor MacLeod.
Thank you, Leader. Report briefly on Brightwells and enforcement. On Brightwells, there was actually a Brightwells board meeting last Friday. And just to remind people that Waverley coordinated and chaired the board meeting, and it's the only meeting at which all the relevant parties come together: Waverley, Crest Nicholson, Surrey County Council, Farnham Town Council, and Arcadis, who are the monitoring surveyor who provide independent reports on the development. Key things that came out was that the housing side is going well in terms of selling houses. They've actually occupied the first 5 flats in the scheme by creating a safe entrance for, to segregate the flat owners from what is still very much a building site. And the selling of the flats is going well. Other things worth reporting on is that those of us who know the South Street car park, the Undercroft part of the car park has got a very poor entrance to Sainsbury's and so on, very poor stairways and lifts that don't work. And that's all being upgraded now to create a better entrance, not just to Sainsbury's, but also to that side of the Brightwell scheme. Excuse me, on the commercial side, Crest and Surrey are still discussing when the official opening date will be of the scheme, but we're still very much hoping that that will be later next year. And until they conclude their discussions, I don't think I want to say any more about that. On licensing and enforcement, just mention a couple of things. Richard Holmwood and colleagues are conducting a review of enforcement across the whole council, and their interviews that they've been holding with heads of services are largely complete now, and they'll be working on an initial report of their initial findings, which they aim to produce within the next 2 or 3 weeks, and we'll bring that to the executive briefing meeting. One or two things that are of interest: that there is a consultation going on at the moment about increased taxi fares in Farnham area. A nice thing to mention, I suppose, is that we've received something like 40 applications for street closures for Jubilee parties, which will take place early June. So that's my report, Leader. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor MacLeod. Councillor Marriott even.
Thank you, Leader. I think I'll save mine for a little later when I present the equalities paper. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Marriott. Councillor Mirrlees.
Thank you, Leader. Good news on the diversity front. We received a grant for 45,000 from the government's local authorities treescape fund, which is being used to fund the planting of around 7,200 new trees in the borough, mainly in the non-woodland areas. With regard to the leisure centres, I'll have a more substantive update when that comes up later.
Thank you, Councillor Mirrlees. Councillor Palmer.
Yes, I think I'll follow the example of my colleagues in a tantric approach to the agenda. I'll come back to it later.
Thank you, Councillor Palmer, as always. Councillor Rivers.
Thank you, Leader. Well, I shall also do the same, but I would add that I did meet with Mead Lane residents in Mead Lane, Farnham, who have put up with flooding and all sorts of stuff in Mead Lane ever since a wall on Vernon Court collapsed some 18, 20 months ago. We are moving slowly, and we have, as I say, we've had one meeting with about 20 residents. We are in communication with them after that, or very shortly will be, and we will arrange a follow-up meeting on the 9th of May. And I hope we can get this sorted before winter comes in. Thank you, Leader.
Thank you, Councillor Rivers. And finally, Councillor Williams.
Thank you. I'll be brief. We're alerting residents to the likelihood of delays in bin collection services over coming weeks. You know, as we know, the COVID pandemic is not yet over. Cases are on the increase, and because waste collection involves people being close to each other in vehicle cabs, the spread of infection is almost inevitable. And if you compound that with the problem of normal winter sickness and the national shortage of HGV drivers, and it is a national problem, that we have a recipe for some level of disruption. As colleagues know, we have managed extremely well to date in the most difficult of circumstances, largely thanks to the work of our officers collaborating closely with the officers of our contractor, Biffa, who've worked really hard to keep our services going, and particularly the bin collection crews who really have gone the extra mile to support maintaining our service. And by way of example, on Friday of last week, there were 19 crew members who were off as a result of sickness, 17 of them due to COVID. And to put that in perspective, that's about a third of the workforce. So there were a number of missed bins last Friday. However, by the end of the weekend, all known missed bin collections had been completed. So clearly, you know, we're going through challenging times, but I know that our officers and Biffa staff and our wonderful crew members have been doing a tremendous job in the circumstances.
Thank you, Councillor Williams. And one other thing I forgot, and I think Councillor Mirrlees also forgot, is that we had a very useful and engaging meeting with Farnham Museum. Would you like to take that one, Keith?
Yeah, we did. I just thought maybe we'd wait to find out what's going to come out of it. That was all. But yes, it was a very positive meeting. And we managed to keep people on the right lines, and I'm feeling very positive about the outcome. So yeah.
I will take any progress I can get on that particular subject, as you probably got gathered by now, Councillor Mirrlees. Okay, then moving on to item 7, recommendations of the Overview and Scrutiny Committees. Can I thank the chairs and vice chairs of the 2 Overview and Scrutiny Committees for attending our session this afternoon to go through their recommendations. I'll do a rough go through of what we discussed for each line, and I'll be referring to each item by the end 2 numbers, so 8.1 rather than the lengthy unique reference that's on the documents. So in regards to the first one for resources ONS, exec are happy to agree that particular item. Regarding KPI for customer service teams, 8.2, we've asked that be explored with David Allam and officers to create a new KPI to understand that particular issue with dropouts. 8.3, we've agreed to restore that at the next realistically possible point. 14, the Berries project, high-level financing strategy underlying the project is coming forward to councillors and to ONS fairly imminently. B, the intended timeline and nature of the public consultation engagement proposal. So at the moment, the proposals outline a point where there will be public consultation. We're drawing up at the moment with officers the exact the detail of that consultation and engagement and when exactly it will take place. So that will also be imminent to ONS and to members. C, assumptions being made about future numbers of staff. So as part of the Where Work Happens project, there'll be a further briefing to outline to members the current numbers of staff operating from the site, where we are with hybrid working and where we think that will go in the future. And finally, D, current figures on the provision and utilisation of car parking in Godalming Town Centre, something that's been raised a great deal, not only in members' briefings and ONS, but also online in the last few days. And certainly if we're going to be discussing car parking, we want to make sure that that's done from a position of having all of the facts rather than a number of assumptions. So that is the position that we'll be going forward on. Moving now on to the recommendations of the Services Overview and Scrutiny Committee. On number 7, which is the first one, in regards to corporate performance report Q3, I'm just going to go through each of the bullet points. The first one, a reliance on agency waste operatives leading to bin collections being missed. And Councillor Williams has explained about how that works in regards to waste operatives. It's not a deliberate choice using agency workers. It is the necessity when COVID and other issues have taken the regular workforce in that area out of commission. Delays to delivery of the car park at Brightwells. I'll just double check. I'll look to our 151 officer just to make sure I explain this correctly. At present, the part of the agreement that we have with Surrey and Crest mean that we are reimbursed for this car park, regardless of how long it takes. Can I just confirm that with you, 151?
Leader, that's correct. Yes, we receive a payment from Crest Nicholson until the new car park is transferred over when it hits the practical completion date.
Thank you. Continuing concern about the 5-year housing land supply. Obviously, that's something that we all have concern about as well, particularly the portfolio holder for planning. Certainly don't want to mix it up with the housing delivery test, which is something that we've seen happen quite frequently. There is another all-member briefing on this subject at the end of April. Inclusion of ward councillors as consultees on the design and preparation of planning applications such as Springfield Elstead. Discussion we had today has proposed that in the same way that members receive an update weekly on planning applications for their ward, we're proposing that a list for pre-application also be constructed, and that's something that we're discussing with officers. And finally, a planning service taking a more proactive approach to ensuring conditions on the application are discharged. We had a very comprehensive update on the planning performance today, which included some pretty good updates about the status of various planning enforcement activities. Councillor MacLeod will be updating in the near future about some changes that we're making to the enforcement structure more generally. Moving then on to 8.1, executive approve the proposals and the amendments set out in the report subject to the following recommendations. So an umbrella for the next 2. Talking then about annual KPIs in 8.2, which the executive were happy to agree. 8.3, development of service-specific customer satisfaction indicators collected directly after the interaction with the council. This was raised by Councillor Philip Townsend at ONS. We've asked officers, each head of service, to let each exec member know how customer satisfaction is considered in each of their departments and for each service, so we can have a look at the nature of that and also if there are any gaps. Target figure for planning indicators. No, apologies, we covered that one. Clear demarcation made within the document between requirements and guidance. So this is in regards to the climate SPD. So we've asked officers to take a more standardized approach to the words shall, must, and will, and should, could, and might within our policy documents, so it's clearer. We're also agreeing the recommendation to properly cross-link references and hyperlinks within our documents so that they're clearer and more accessible, not just for us, but for members of the public. We are also going to be considering, and I know Councillor Rivers will probably pick it up later, this is 9.3, about how we will be incorporating things like ground source and air source heat pumps into buildings and what impact that has on residents in terms of disruption. 9.4, consistent format for planning SPDs. I don't think anybody has any issue with that. This is one of the joys of using different consultants. They will use different report styles, but it's something that we can certainly take up. 9.5, a glossary of terms. I think we're all happy to agree that because it will help. And then 9.6, also to agree, which is to wherever possible, quantify terms such as minimize or reduce so that they're not ambiguous. So if members of the executive are happy to agree to all of those comments, we can move on to item 8. Are you happy to agree those? Thank you. And thank you again to the chairs and vice chairs of ONS for your constructive engagement earlier today. Item 8, affordable homes delivery strategy, and I can move on to Councillor Palmer to begin.
Thank you. Yes, members will have seen the extensive report. The emphasis here is very much on the affordability aspects. I mean, we're talking about building more, building better, and building for life. But we're very conscious of the fact that there is a real shortage in our area of accommodation which people on everyday incomes can afford. And the effect of that is that many of the people who we depend on, who work in Waverley, are unable to live in the area. And that's something which I think pretty much everybody finds regrettable. Now, I'm always keen that the position papers that we put forward make actual decisions clear, because there's a tendency with all such reports to give the impression that there's no real need for choices. And in particular, I draw attention to objective BB2, where it states that delivery of social rent is considered first in preference to affordable rent on all planning applications requiring affordable housing. And what that means translated is that we will be looking at rented accommodation at something more like 60–65% of market levels, rather than what the government normally talks about as affordable, being 80% of market levels. And the reason for that is simply that even with a reduction of 20% on market levels, the homes remain unaffordable for a great many people. The other major stress that we've got at the current time is, of course, the soaring energy prices. And that reinforces the efforts that we were, in any case, pursuing to have homes which maximize sustainability and minimize the need for energy. And that was originally put forward in the context of our climate emergency strategy, but it's become increasingly obvious that it's also essential for affordability for the longer term, and indeed for ability to ride out the kind of shocks that we're seeing at the moment. So I commend the strategy to the executive, and happy to take up any questions that may arise.
Thank you, Councillor Palmer. Councillor Rivers.
before I ask you a question, I should know the answer anyway. I think I'd firstly just like to thank our officers very much for the amount of work that has gone into this. And as Councillor Palmer said, if we have a challenge with affordable homes, I think when we started this, say 2 years ago, if we thought we had a challenge then, we have a ×2 or a double challenge now to get through. Let me just tell you a little story. I came across my mother's papers on Mothering Sunday, one of which showed that in 1955, we moved into a 2-bedroomed flat in Swindon at the huge rent of £1, 5 shillings and 3p per week, of which her weekly income was £4. And I think we need to look not only at a percentage of rents against market rent, but also against what we would expect people actually to be taking home. You know, how much of disposable income they are left over. So challenges are before us, councillors, and with our officers' support and advice, I'm sure we will get there. Thank you, Leader.
Thank you both. Councillor Williams.
Yeah, I just wanted to echo the comments of Councillor Follows about the report, which is, I think, an excellent report and an enormous amount of work and effort and dedication, I think, has gone into the production of it. I mean, the concept of build more, build better, build for life, I think is a great concept. And I'd also like to echo the words of Councillor Palmer in relation to the desperate need for sustainable homes. You know, we've been reminded this week about the severity of the climate crisis again, and the failure of world governments to properly address the crisis, to avoid the kind of devastation that a climate crisis can bring. And we have also been reminded of the need to sort out sustainable and renewable energy as a result of the cutting of supplies from Russia in what is the quite correct response to the appalling situation in Ukraine. And beyond this, the rise in energy prices means that it is of absolute paramount necessity to support our tenants and to support not just tenants, but householders throughout this country to really begin to invest more in sustainable energy. And we as a council need desperately to be doing our bit to actually promote sustainable, renewable energy sources and ensure that homes are energy efficient. And that is a clear priority. It's the right priority. And it's something that is not only about being right for the planet, it's actually right for our tenants who are actually suffering enormously as a result of this terrible squeeze in terms of energy costs that's happening at the moment. Thank you.
Thank you. Any other comments? So I'll just say that first of all, thank you to the officers in particular, Alice and Esther and Andrew on the call. Also to Councillor Rosamond, who actually started this process during her tenure as housing portfolio holder several months ago. So thank you to her as well. I think anybody who on the mad meter reading day last week was trying to last minute file their meter readings, or who have received new bills as a result of the current energy crisis, will need no convincing as to the reasons why we're doing quite a bit of this, and also what we're proposing under the following item as well. So I'm very, very happy and very pleased to commend this to you all for it's a recommendation to recommend to full council. And have all those in favour, please show.
Chairman, sorry, I did indicate to speak.
My apologies, Councillor Hyman. I am reading the wrong part of my list, and please do. Are you registered to speak? My apologies.
Thank you. Sorry to interrupt there. I thought
my mistake, Jerry. I do apologise.
I've read through it and I think it's a good report. I would question the value of some of the responses or some of the information we've been given in the in response to the survey. For instance, where we have the word clouds or whatever they call them, and which just basically say that in response to the questions about building more, 6 people said build in their response. Well, of course they would, and we have exactly the same to do with rents. And most people said rent in their response, which is completely a waste of paper and a waste of waste of our time reading it. We don't need that sort of thing. But if you read it through and check it, most important issue here, I think, is to make sure that we're absolutely clear where we stand and what we're doing in respect of rents, because there are a lot of comments in there about, obviously you would expect tenants to say, but a lot of other organisations as well who were consulted, it appears, have said we need to minimise rents, where of course with social rents, which I'm very glad has been brought into the equation here in response to the consultation, we've now said apparently that social rent is going to be a priority in determining planning applications, so that's great. That's quite a big change in policy, really, actually, I think, and it needs to be explained fully, probably to us. We've got a policy at the moment, which was stated only 6 weeks ago, of maximising our social rents, that we're going to put rents up every year by as part of our plan to be able to deliver more. Part of our plan is to maximise the rents according to what the government will allow us. So, we aren't doing what we've been asked by in response to the consultation. And if you go to page 32, you'll see under rethinking rents BB2 under build better, it says conversely, rents which are too high, which will set households up to fail. I'd like just to change that a little bit. Obviously, we'll be setting ourselves up to fail. If our policy is to maximise rents, we're setting ourselves up to fail, because it's one of our corporate objectives to provide affordable housing. And if we're setting households up to fail and saying so, we're setting ourselves up to fail. And I think I'd like that changed, the wording there, certainly creating difficulties and contrary to our own policy for rents that are too high. But I haven't got time now to go into those in any great detail. There is one particular issue on page 38 I wanted to ask about. Top right-hand corner, if you've got that there, Chairman.
Yes.
Where it says on the right-hand side there, affordable homes for rent secured in perpetuity. I think there's a lot of, I think there's a lack of understanding as to what the right to buy rules are. And I think it needs to be explained to people in here, because just saying affordable homes for rent secured in perpetuity isn't necessarily something that we can just deliver just like that, as far as I know. It would be nice perhaps if officers would explain it so that executive members know, and they might want to ensure a few different words are put in. I think that'll, the most important question, I suppose, is there a rent cap on social housing? I don't think in here I've seen anywhere where it explains clearly whether or not there is or is not a rent cap on social rent. It may be sort of in government policy somewhere rather than our own, but if you could clarify that, I'd very much appreciate it. And the only other question is, I think the executive ought to know why 30% disagreed with the BBB, the build better, build whatever it is of the on one of these pages. 30% of people disagreed on each with our policy. Why? I mean, you wouldn't necessarily think that actually was any reason to disagree. So can officers explain to us why they think 30% of people disagreed with what we're doing here? Because that's what the survey showed. So would appreciate that. Is there, so my questions, is there a rent cap? Where do we really stand with the right to buy and building in perpetuity? And why do 30% disagree? Thanks.
So I can answer a couple of those, and I might need to bring in Andrew Smith if he's willing on the Zoom, just to pick up a few of the others. Certainly in terms of right to buy, I don't think any of the exec need an education on how right to buy works. I don't think most of us quite agree with how it works, in that it allows properties to move out of our control and effectively cannot be replaced at the same cost. Because obviously the land that is on is often more expensive, so they can't be replaced one for one. I think the other thing it's sort of drifting into is that the council is also looking at making sure that tenants have a more secure tenancy, and it's removing in another document elsewhere, it was discussed last week at the Landlord Services Board, and I believe gathered their endorsement, was to remove flexible tenancies in order to give tenants the security over their property over the long run. So I believe it's probably referring to both, Councillor Hyman, in that. I am not going to guess, well, I am going to guess, of course I'm going to guess. I'm going to guess why some people were against certain elements of this policy. I would imagine if you ask anybody the question, do you want to see more building going on in your area, you are likely to get at least 30% of people without any further thought whatsoever saying no, they don't want any more building. Partly because they see so much expensive market housing going on in the area in which they live. And that pretty much rings true, I would say, for every community in Waverley. I again have a...
but yeah, but that doesn't apply to this because it's about affordable housing specifically, whether people would want more affordable housing.
Can I just comment, Jerry? First of all, can we not do a back and forth on this? But I think really what's the case here is that it's difficult to second guess the individual responses of people in such a consultation. I am going to guess, based on having spoken to many residents on this, that many will have seen the words build and housing and probably not seen other words or not taken into account other parts of the question. Certainly a lot of the types of canvassing I've done in the past tends to show people against building. It's the nuance, though, that matters. But I don't want to put words in people's mouth when they didn't respond. They didn't say that in the consultation. They merely said they were against. We can hypothesize why. I'm sure others can too. Just going on to your other questions, we have a balance to maintain with a housing register that is a greater demand than we have supply to build houses, whilst at the same time maintaining good quality houses for those that already have them and trying to maintain some level of control on rent. It's my understanding that the cap effectively on rent is inflation plus 1%. I'd note again and again and again that the rent levels in Waverley and the raise this year, as it has been every year, has been less than inflation, in this case quite significantly less than inflation. But we also need to build more properties so that those who currently have no social house to live in can have one, which is just as important as maintaining some control on the rents. I rent privately, by the way, and the raise in my rent this year was vastly in excess of inflation, let alone the rent that we've got here. Any other comments from other members as to regard Councillor Hyman's points? Councillor Palmer.
Looking through the comments that people made, it's fairly evident that people who were critical are primarily critical because they feel that the rents are still going to be too high. They're not sure that we will be able to achieve what we say we want to achieve, and they're afraid that that they'll end up with something more like the government's definition of affordable. And we sympathise. I think that is one of the core elements of a strategy that we are trying to pleasantly surprise those members of the public who are sceptical that we can achieve what we say. On the right to buy, we obviously are not in a position to override government legislation. And in strategy BM3, we stress that we are seeking to ensure that the properties remain at an affordable level, affordable in our terms, rather than be let off to someone else at a higher rent. And we will lobby, as many councils do, for the right to buy policy to be amended. but I appreciate the point that Councillor Hyman's making.
I think it's pretty clear that delivery of this is going to be a challenge, but the only way for sure we know we will fail is to not try at all. So we have to try. Any other comments before I take us back to the vote on the recommendations? Okay, the recommendations are that we recommend this policy to full council. All those in favour, please show. Thank you. Okay, moving then on to the housing asset management strategy. Councillor Rivers to introduce.
Thank you, Leader, and I'm hoping that we may be accompanied by Hugh Wagstaff tonight, but maybe just looking up at the board here, only Andrew is here, is that right? Yeah, okay. Well, this is not something that I can go through in detail, and even if I did, we'd be here till next week at least. This document has gone through the Landlord Services Advisory Board, which is a joint tenants board, and they made some very worthwhile comments. One in particular is that we produce an executive summary, something that people can read quickly, and one that can be published. And I've seen a draft copy of that, and that is one of the board's recommendations. I think the point the leader made about education or training or perception is a very valid one. We do have to look at the ways in which these new facilities that we will have to adopt to ensure that we have a low carbon build. This sort of change is a big change. We have to understand it. We can't expect our tenants, our residents, necessarily just to adopt it. Air source heat pumps, terrific. We've all had a view of those, but they don't make our radiators as hot as they used to be. My view, of course, is that the first thing that we need to do is to take a fabric first approach. We have to wrap our houses in blankets to make sure that not only are we a low carbon economy, a low carbon build, but that we minimize as far as possible the outlay that our tenants will have to make really from the 1st of this month as electricity and gas prices go way up. And this is, we talked about a challenge at the last item. This is going to be a tough one. I can only recommend to members here that the LSAB are supportive of this way forward. They know, as indeed do we all, that we have to build more houses. We have, as of the 1st of April, 1,079 households on the waiting list. And we have just less than 5,000 houses. So we have to get our building materials together. So this strategy, this framework is going to take us through to the end of the decade. It will ensure that we know what we have in detail. It ensures that we know what we want. Well, we know what we want now, but we have to keep our fingers crossed on that. And we know what we must do. What we have to do now, of course, is do it. So thank you, officers. That's it, Leader. I can't say any more.
Thank you, Councillor Rivers. I've got one speaker on this item, Councillor Hyman.
Sorry, couldn't get my mouse to click on the right place. I have to agree with a lot of what Councillor Rivers has said, of course. Although I do disagree with in some elements. I see this more as a strategy for devising a strategy, because we haven't got the information and the answers that we need at the moment to be able to produce the strategy. That's the way I read this. We don't know whether we've got alternatives to putting in gas boilers in the shorter term or even in the longer term that are viable. We've got caveats in there that obviously ensure that we're not going to be dumping too much of the cost of this onto the tenants' rents, because obviously, you know, if it's only Waverley's tenants who are having to pay for climate change friendly, or the most environmentally friendly heating that we've got, that would be an odd way to produce affordable housing, obviously, because it would be doing the opposite. I can refer you to page 134, which is a strategic objectives. We see the objectives that we've got there, and alongside it's on page 135 under asset data, it says that stock condition surveys will be vital to understanding the current standard of our properties and informing the strategy and the plan. We've got I've been through this how many times in the past 20 years. 2003, when preparing for a stock transfer, the council decided to produce do a stock condition survey. Then 2006, because they hadn't actually produced it by then, and of course doesn't involve any of our current staff or councillors really. This Carol, perhaps, I guess. We've got, I think there was another one in 2010, something like that. We're going to produce a stock condition survey, and probably another one about 2015. And it's about time that we were told again that we're going to do a stock condition survey. Now, presumably, actually, we've done some at some point, and we've got a certain amount of information. What I want to know is, why haven't we got? And you know, with computers, we know what work's being done to properties. We know what they were surveyed. Yes, it's possible that tenants would have done certain things, and yes, it's possible that, you know, themselves replaced a bathroom or a kitchen themselves and not told the council. But that's a pleasant surprise rather than a problem. And of course, yeah, we wouldn't know if a new tenant's moved in and kicked every door in a flat or whatever. But nevertheless, we shouldn't be constantly saying we need to conduct a stock condition survey unless we're just creating jobs for life for people. So, you know, I'd like to know why. At some point, I'd like to know why for certain we don't have a stock condition survey that we can rely upon. Never have had, it appears, in the past 20 years. The other thing, if I move you on to gas boilers, because it's the big issue on. Well, it's the page before 149, because I can't read 148 because of the picture that's over the top of the number. But you'll see on page 148, halfway down the right-hand column under gas boiler replacement, it says, we'll aim to no longer install any new gas boilers from March 2027. We will aim no longer. We could do with some work on some typos. Obviously, the person who wrote this wouldn't have recognised the typo. You can't see your mistakes with your own eyes. But other people I'd have expected to have read this. From April 2022, why? We'll be telling you about that's from now. We will reduce the life cycle of a gas boiler to 8 years. This is difficult here because that means, I would imagine, that 75 to 90%, somewhere like that, of our council houses now have suddenly today have gas boilers, or from the council meeting at the end of April, I guess, we'll have out-of-date gas boilers. That's a massive expense we are suddenly putting upon ourselves by the reading of that. Everybody's
going to wrap up, Jerry. You're about to go over your time.
Yeah, but thanks very much. So I would like to know when that's, you know, are we saying how much is that going to cost us, and where's the plan? Is that all built into the plan? Thanks very much. Oh, I would also disagree about when Paul Rivers said only Andrew, because it's not only Andrew, this is Andrew. But, thank you.
Nice. Thank you, Councillor Hyman. I'm fairly sure within the document, and I'll find the exact page, there is an indication of when the stock survey is going to take place in order to actually do this. I'm pretty convinced that we were elected to try and actually do the difficult tasks, and we shouldn't shy away from them. I completely agree with Councillor Rivers. A lot of this is going to be a bit of a challenge. I think the bit for me that is most important here, other than getting a proper picture of actually what the condition of our houses is throughout the borough, is also making sure that when we are looking at what we can do to decarbonise and to reduce the energy costs for residents, we need to have a clear picture of what the houses are, what the fabric of them is. And going back to Councillor Rivers' point, it's not necessarily about installing a big flashy new heat pump. It could well be about proper insulation, proper cladding for the property, so that it is not leaching energy and heat from it like crazy. So there's a lot I think we can take away from this to move forward. I think the other point, Councillor Hyman, I just want to make clear as well is that the cost for a resident, and I'm sure I don't need to tell you this, the cost for a resident is not going to be just rent. There might be slightly higher rent going forward if we have to renovate lots and lots of properties. But the only reason that we would be doing that for not just for decarbonisation, but also to reduce their energy costs. And that would be one of the primary objectives of doing that in the first place. So although their rent might be slightly higher, it would be very much hoped that their energy bills would be much less as a result of doing that. Were there any other points that I've missed? I'm just going to quickly just ask officers, particularly Hugh Wagstaff, who's on the call. Has there been a previous asset survey that we should be aware of, and if so, when?
Sorry that it took so difficult to get through. Yes, so we've been doing regular stock condition surveys for many years, and really we came to a halt just before COVID. So basically, we haven't had any stock condition surveys for probably about two and a half years, because there was some illness within the team just before COVID came in, and then one person has left the team. So we've just got one person who's been doing some stock condition surveys in recent weeks. So basically, we're about two and a half years behind our regular program. So we used to do 20% each year, and as I say, so we're about 40%, probably 50% without a survey that's not within the last 5 years.
Thank you, Hugh. So better data means a better baseline, means action that's a bit more directed and sensible. The other point I wanted to just make also was page 146, where we start to actually explore the actual cost of energy efficiency and decarbonisation, something that I think we all talk about and lots of councils talk about, but without any particular idea of the scale of the problem or the cost. We're also aware of what government policy is trying to get to, albeit not fast enough for most of us. And if we are able to estimate what the variance is between government policy and what we have now, it's the sort of thing where I think it will help us apply for money and make the point to government about the gap in their own funding for policies that they claim to support. As you can see on page 146, that gap is currently significant and is money that we will need to find somewhere in order to achieve this. I'm going to move now, sorry, Graham Clark.
Leader, just on the point of resources, in Para 6.1 of the covering report, we refer to the HRA strategic review that Council approved the initiation of in February. And that is where we will be using this report to help inform that, because this is quite rightly, as Councillor Hyman said, there'll be significant costs to delivering this. So this will help inform that review of the business plan. And allocate resources. And one of the key questions in that review will be, how do we allocate the HRA resources across all the different strands of business, including looking after our own stock, running a tenant service, and new builds and new acquisitions. So that will all come together over the next few months, and we'll be bringing that back to the executive and scrutiny in the autumn.
Thank you, Graham. Any other comments before I move to the recommendations? Okay, not seeing any. So first of all, thank you to Hugh and his team, Peter David, and also to the Landlord Services Board for their contributions and review of this document last week. The recommendation is in two parts. First of all, to approve the Housing Asset Management Strategy 22 to 2030 for adoption, and to note that the Landlord Services Advisory Board undertake to monitor the implementation and performance of the strategy. Can I have all those in favour, please show? Thank you all. Moving then on to item 10, the Farnham and Godalming Leisure Centre refurbishments and the Edge Leisure Centre contract position. If I can hand over to Councillor Mirrlees to introduce.
Thank you, Leader. The Leisure Portfolio Report has been brought to Executive to clarify a few key elements that will inform the contract specification for the new leisure management contract, which goes to tender this year and commences in July 2023. Farnham and Godalming Leisure Centre refurbishments were about to start when the COVID-19 pandemic hit in March 2020, and all major projects were put on hold. However, with the leisure centres recovering and the review of the leisure contract, we now have the opportunity to implement these projects and bring forward a new business case for improvements to the facilities which will need and meet future demand. This is also the appropriate time to review the management model for the Edge Leisure Centre and explore a financial saving to the council for the transfer of the facility back to Surrey County Council to be managed by Woolmer Hill School. This would not only deliver the saving identified in the MTFP, but also maximise the benefits for both the school and local community, increasing school usage and maintaining the current provision of community bookings in evenings and weekends. These are great projects that will add to the council's commitment for a new low carbon leisure centre in Cranley. By making the clear indication of the council's commitment to leisure and the health and well-being of its residents in Waverley, we will be in the best position to attract leisure contractors to run our facilities beyond the end of the current contract in June 2023.
Thank you, Councillor Mary-Louise. I've got no other speakers on this, so members of the executive, any comments? I have one comment, as always. If I speak with my Godalming hat on, I think one of the things that residents have made very clear is that if we're making alterations to the car park at Godalming Leisure Centre, firstly, there needs to be a very good reason for that, but also that needs to be done with full consultation in mind. So my request to officers is that when we get to the time of looking at this, particularly on the Godalming side of this, that we do undertake a full and proper consultation, not just with the residents that live local to the centre, but ideally with as much as the Godalming community as possible, and ideally with the town council as well. Any other comments before I bring it to the recommendations? Okay, so the recommendations. Recommended that executive considers the finding of this report and agrees. 2.1, officers review the business case for the Farnham Leisure Centre refurbishment and if viable, include the project within the new leisure centre management contract. Officers 2.2, officers review the business case for the Godalming Leisure Centre refurbishment and if viable, include the project within the new leisure management contract and specification. And 2.3, officers remove the Edge Leisure Centre from the new leisure management contract and work with Surrey County Council to terminate the lease and transfer the operation of the facilities. Can I have all those in favour, please show? And alas, we might not be going to account at the Edge if that happens going forward. So we'll have to see. I'm sure that will depress all of you. Okay, item 11, the climate change SPD, and I will hand over to Councillor Williams to introduce.
Okay, thank you, Leader. First of all, I'm sorry that Liz Townsend, whose name appears alongside mine, is not able to be here this evening. I mean, I particularly would want to say in her absence that she has worked extremely hard to ensure that this paper is as good as it can possibly be at this stage, and she certainly speaks as someone who shares the passion which I have for doing our absolute utmost to tackle climate change and to do our contribution in support of the climate emergency. I'd also like to thank the various officers and our consultants who have put in a tremendous amount of work to bring forward this document. And it is an attempt to ensure that our corporate objectives and our recognition of the climate and ecological emergency have the maximum impact on planning decisions. Planning should be a key mechanism for delivering sustainable development. However, we are aware that any council that is seriously determined to fight climate change, promote biodiversity, and promote sustainable building has the dice loaded against it. We know that the deregulatory nature of our planning framework, evidenced by elements such as granting permitted development rights to cover more substantial forms of development, together with the introduction of a so-called presumption in favour of sustainable development, directly undermine local accountability and limit councils' ability to manage development on behalf of communities. So, notwithstanding all that, Our intention from the start has been to push the requirement for developers to take account of sustainability issues as far as we can, so that our supplementary planning document is as robust as it possibly can be without it directly contradicting our entirely inadequate national planning policy framework and our outdated planning legislation, which is incompatible even with the government's own modest and entirely inadequate climate targets. We're committed to taking this forward. Our climate change and sustainability strategy stated our intention to use legislation, local plans and supplementary planning documents to ensure developments are sustainable, maintain the highest levels of energy efficiency and use renewable, sustainable energy wherever possible. And I think this document does an effective job in trying to secure those objectives. One element which has emerged since we embarked on the process of developing the plan, and which came before our overview and services overview and scrutiny committee, and was recognised by them, was the notion that we need to be very clear in this strategy between the measures which we are proposing, the measures which could be taken, and those which should be taken, and those which must be taken. And we want to whilst we want to push the requirements on developers as much as we possibly can, beyond this, we do need to be clear that applications that can demonstrate delivery of could measures in addition to should measures will enable those developments to be looked upon more favourably. So in short, I think we're putting before the executive today a document which I believe to be an SPD which is robust, radical and realistic. It is not in its final form, but it is in a form that is ready to go forward at this point for further, wider consultation. And I would strongly recommend it to executive.
Thank you, Councillor Williams, and also for the work that you and Councillor Townsend, as well as many officers. I can see Graham and Alice on the Zoom, so thank you to both of you for what you've done for this. I'm afraid if there's anybody else there, I can't currently see. I've got Councillor Hyman, who is registered to speak on this item. Councillor Hyman.
Got it. Thank you again, Chairman. Yes, now this is a difficult one because it's a little bit confusing, I think, or it would be, I expect it would be to most people reading this document, because whilst it's called Climate Change and Sustainability, sustainability is primarily through the citing of development, and this document really doesn't address that very much. It doesn't, and I agree absolutely with officers. I know that Graham Parrott would say this does not allocate any housing, and it doesn't. You know, as far as biodiversity and protection is concerned, I appreciate it's got some what I fear is going to be fairly worthless content in there to us in respect of biodiversity offsetting. I don't entirely agree with offsetting, because you cause the harm and you've got no guarantee that the offsetting is going to do anything positive. But if you would turn to page 258 of your papers, paragraph 257 actually, the paragraph 2.3, it says all European sites lying wholly or partly within 15 kilometres of the borough are included, to reflect the fact that development resulting from a plan may affect European sites which are located outside the boundary. And at 2.6, it tells us that European sites were identified primarily because they lie within the distance over which visitors from Waverley Borough are likely to make recreational day visits. So it's 15 kilometre around the Weldon Heaths. And this has a practical and very current practical implication for us. An example being Loxwood Road at Alfold, which I think most people agree is not sustainable in the greater definition of sustainable development. We'd include transport and all sorts of that, and local facilities in that consideration. This SPD doesn't really cover that. But obviously, because it's within 15 kilometres, this document confirms what the surveys from Borden, Whitehill, etc. told us, which is a 15 kilometre visitor catchment area. Alfold and Loxwood lies within that, and we've got a slam dunk reason for pursuing obeying the law, which is our duty, avoiding an injustice in the courts. Continue with a judicial review on the basis of new information is that actually we don't have an appropriate assessment and it needs it, therefore consent can't lawfully be granted. Very simple. We have that duty, as I say, and we have a duty to avoid injustice. I just want to know whether you will do that. Do you intend to pursue this and ensure that justice is done, and confirm to residents that you'll do so? Thanks very much.
If I can say quite bluntly, the only place one of the few areas where the current national government is liberal is in its interpretation of what sustainable means when it comes to development. I'll hand over to Councillor Williams, who I'm sure will wish to respond to a number of those points.
Yes, first of all, I think in terms of the question of appropriate assessment, and I was waiting for the moment when Councillor Hyman would utter those words, we will continue as a council to follow the legal advice that we have sought and been given on successive occasions. Now, the Councillor Hyman is correct that sustainability is very pertinent to the siting of development. That is absolutely correct. This is not a document that is actually about the allocation of sites. This is a supplementary planning document. It has the allocation of sites is actually undertaken through the local plan, LPP1 and LPP2, and we cannot incorporate anything within our supplementary planning document that contradicts or is different from what is in our local plan. So far as any of the sort of technical points that Councillor Hyman raises, I would urge him to feed those in to the public consultation, because as I said, this is not a final document. And I would certainly ask any of our planning officers whether they have any particular comments arising from any of the points which were made.
I see Graham and Alice on the Zoom. Is there anything you wanted to add in response to Councillor Hyman's points?
Shall I just come in, Leader, very quickly? No, not really at this stage. I think the important point is, as Councillor Williams has said, is that this is not about making policy. It's trying to make sure that those applications and developments that are put forward are as sustainable as they can be within the context of the policy framework that we have. And obviously it is a document that we're now seeking approval to take out to consultation. So there will be an opportunity to pick up some of these points if necessary through that process. Thank you.
Thank you, Graham. Any further comments on this before we move to the recommendation? Which, bear with me, I will have to scroll miles back to get to. Right, I'm not seeing any other comments. So the recommendation is in two parts. It's recommended that the executive, after considering comments from the Services Overview and Scrutiny Committee, which we did at the beginning of the agenda, firstly, 1, agree that the SPD to be subject to a minimum 4-week public consultation under Regulation 13 of the Town and Country Local Planning England Regulations 2012, the regulations, and recommendation 2, delegates authority to the Head of Planning and Economic Development after consultation with the portfolio holders for Planning and Economic Development and Environment and Sustainability to make minor editorial changes prior to the consultation and as a result of any changes made by the executive. Can I have all those in favour, please show? Thank you very much, everyone. Okay, moving now on to item 12, Community Infrastructure Levy SIL Bidding Cycle 2021-22. If I can hand over to Councillor Palmer to introduce in your capacity as Chair of the SIL Board.
Thank you. Yes, I'd like to thank the officers for all the work in preparing this report and the cross-party colleagues on the SIL Board who helped decide the recommendations unanimously. One point which might be striking is that we've allocated much less than the total amount of SIL available. And the reason for that is that we don't feel that the task of the SIL Board, or indeed the council, is to spend money as quickly as possible, but simply to spend it on projects that meet the objectives of community infrastructure as set out in the guidelines. And I did notice, we all noticed that some of the applications were scanty in those terms, and we'd encourage future applicants to go through the criteria and check that they meet the primary objectives. But it's possible that in the future quite substantial applications will come through, for instance from the county, and the infrastructure levy is intended not only to support small local projects, even if they have uses beyond the immediate area, but also fairly substantial infrastructure which may be necessary to reflect the development of our community. So I do ask the executive to approve the 4 projects that we felt did pass the criteria, and also to support the continued work of the SIL committee in working with the community on future projects.
Thank you very much, Councillor Palmer. Any speakers on these items? I have a couple of comments otherwise. Peter.
Quick question for Councillor Palmer. Can you explain to whoever is watching how often the bids, the bidding process is on an annual basis?
Yes, in principle, as soon as each round has been completed, it's open to any group or individual to make an application for the next round. And the default is annual. If there was a sudden need to look at something earlier, we can always consider that. But in the interest of having comparable applications, we think it is useful to have a regular pattern so that we don't miss out on something particularly beneficial because we've made an early decision to commit to something else.
Just a quick follow-up. Organisations that have not been successful but were shown to be worthwhile, can they reapply?
Absolutely, and we'd really encourage that. I think it's a process rather than a one-off decision that either yes or no. We've tried where possible for each of the applications that didn't succeed to set out what the reasons were. So for instance, there's one which had a lot of boxes ticked, a lot of community support, but where the application was for a very substantial sum and there was no co-funding from anyone else. And I think the committee would have felt that it was more powerful, the application would have been more powerful if they'd been able to show that the support of the community was also reflected in contribution to the costs. And in the same way, we're happy to discuss with any organisation what the limitations are and what they might need to do to address them. What we can't do is make commitments in advance, because we have to compare the applications at the time. And so for that reason, we can't be lobbied, so to speak. But we're more than happy to discuss what the limitations are. And in particular, I'd encourage those who evidently from the comments nearly succeeded, but maybe had 1 or 2 points that need to be addressed, have another go.
Thank you, Councillor Palmer. And yes, I was going to ask whether there was any kind of SIL double jeopardy that applied, where you could apply again if you were in that position. Certainly, I will take offline, but I would like to understand a little bit more about particularly the Broadwater Park item, just to understand why that failed, as Godalming Town Council are renovating the other half of it. And I think I just again stand slightly surprised / disappointed that if we're in a situation where Parkmead Primary School can write a successful application and a proper bid to get SIL, and yet Surrey County Council on 2 of its applications submitted bids that lacked sufficient detail for even basics on highways, which really is kind of what this whole process is for. Can I just confirm are we reaching out to Surrey to try and remedy this going forward?
Yes, and to be fair to Surrey, I think some of the applications may be considered expressions of interest. They want to put down a marker, but they would accept, I think, that the applications were not yet in a position to be approved. I always take a charitable view.
Far more charitable than I think, in this case. Any further comments from other members of the executive? Okay, I've got no additional speakers on this item, so bear with me when I get back to the recommendations. So it's recommended that the executive agree to the recommendations of the SIL Advisory Board and approve the allocation of strategic SIL funding to the projects as set out in this report. This is subject to the completion of the final relevant checks and the signing of funding agreements, details of which are delegated to the strategic director in consultation with the portfolio holder for housing delivery, which in this case is Councillor Palmer as chair of the SIL Advisory Board. Those in favour, please, can you show? Thank you very much. And sorry, one further supplementary question. When is the next round of SIL bidding? If somebody, Marissa, I imagine, is probably the person to answer that question on the Zoom.
Thank you, Chair. We haven't agreed the exact dates yet, but it will follow the same pattern as last year. So opening for bids in July and closing for bids in October. So about a 3-month period.
Thank you very much, Marissa. Okay, item 13, moving to the corporate equality objectives, and if I can hand over to Councillor Penny Marriott.
Thank you, Leader. The journey for this policy began 2 years ago, really, with the death of George Floyd, the terrible death of George Floyd, where Black Lives Matter were on everyone's mind. And Waverley issued a statement containing the words, "Waverley will take steps to ensure equality and fairness in our approach." So that was the beginning. And then a year later, the executive decided to have a portfolio holder with this particular equality, diversity and inclusion remit. In the current climate, I think it's even more essential that we recognise the importance of treating everyone with fairness. And I've been working with the Corporate Equality Group to review and update the Council's equality objectives as they stood at that time, which were quite small. In fact, I was sort of about that big. And I now have pleasure in presenting the results of this review to you with an associated action plan. I thank the Resources ONS Committee for their comments, but unfortunately were received after this had been printed, and so they have been given to you as a supplement. The As well as these set of objectives, we also highlight areas in which we will be focusing on in the next 2 years, which include getting a better understanding of our communities, taking zero tolerance approach to bullying, discrimination and harassment, working towards an inclusive and accessible working environment at the council, and having a process to ensure our decisions do not discriminate against any protected characteristic group. The latter is done via an equality impact assessment, which is carried out before all decisions are made, made in the council. The action plan set out in Annex 1 and with the supplement will ensure that we can monitor any progress that we make. So it isn't just we will do this and it's all airy-fairy. There are objectives and we can monitor our progress against them. And like most of these policies, this is the beginning, because you may have got this far with some of the things which the equality impact assessment was very, very worthwhile to do. We will continue, and I think we still have diversity and inclusion and an awful lot of equality left to add to the policy. I commend the amended equality objectives and associated action plan to the executive for approval, and as it's set out in the supplement and in page 5 of the agenda. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Marriott. And yes, just to confirm, the document, the version of the document in question is the one included in the supplementary agenda, which is both online and was sent by Democratic Services. Before I just bring in anybody else, I think firstly, thank you to the officers for convening this. I think this is an area where we could easily stray into quite diverse, quite divisive subject matter at present, and certainly looking at the way this has been dealt with in other areas, even within Surrey. Has been unhelpful and deliberately, in some cases, divisive. I think we're all able to admit that between us, we had a fairly robust debate on some of the themes and issues that this brought up. It was one I think most of us expected that we needed to have. I'm personally of the view that we're not in a borough that is particularly prone to extremes on either end of the spectrum, and that actually with almost all things there is a reasonable and moderate middle ground where we can understand and respect the rights of one group of people whilst not either ignoring or the reality or the perception of issues in another group, which hopefully means that we can come to a sensible position where we don't leave anybody behind. I'm now going to bring in Councillor Clark.
Thank you, Chair. Well, I certainly support the corporate equality objectives. Thank you. And I note one of them is that we intend to adopt gender neutral language, whatever appropriate, in all council publications. Now, I've always believed in consensus, and I'm happy to be pragmatic in order to come to an agreement on most things. However, I've detected already some divisions opening up on this issue. So I would urge common sense and consensus in adopting any of the objectives, as there always is the risk of listening to the side that shouts the loudest. As a more general comment on the wokeness debate raging in this country, we can all clearly observe some on both sides displaying intolerance and resentment, even in some cases, rage and hostility, where you're either against us or, sorry, you're either with us or against us. A giant fissure has opened up, and there is a crack in our society growing wider every day. And whilst the propagandists representing each side in this culture war clash with each other, neither on either side can hear a word that the other side says, and neither sometimes do they want to. In the gulf between the two sides, however, there is an enormous space occupied by most of the people in the country who just want to get on with their daily lives. They're alternately baffled, bored, and even betrayed by the noises that emanate from both sides, I think it's now time for this toxic and binary madness to stop before the division becomes permanent. Thank you, Chairperson.
Thank you, Peter. Any other comments from anybody in the room? I think we've in various places had different versions of this debate, and I think we've reached a reasonable consensus in the middle. And I think that my final comments on this would be, my hope is that nobody feels that they can't have the discussion, that nobody feels like they are afraid to raise the issue, and that nobody feels that they are going to be made less of, or anybody who's, we want to make sure everybody feels they can raise these issues in a safe and sensible way. I've spoken to a number of residents who have found the debates on some of these subjects so toxic that they're afraid to even open their mouth. And I think he's even a local politician, even I have some reticence, and I certainly have some reticence as a white male bringing up some of these subjects, as I have clearly not been in a group that has been particularly discriminated throughout most of the life of humanity. So thank you very much to Councillor Marriott and to the officers, particularly Louise Norrie, for not only putting this together, but for also listening patiently to the debate that was going on in the background, and for recognising that in the documents that have come forward. Any further speakers before I close this one down? Okay, no, bear with me while I get back to the recommendation. It is recommended that the executive makes the following recommendations to council: to approve the corporate equality objectives 22-25 as set out in the supplementary Annex 1, and to note that the corporate equality group undertake to monitor the implementation of the associated action plan. Can I have all those in favour, please show? Thank you, everyone. Okay, moving then on to item 14, which is the annual review of corporate performance indicators set. There is no specific portfolio holder that owns this one, as it effectively belongs to everyone. And this is really to seek exec approval to the changes in the current performance indicator set for the following year. This has been done in consultation with ONS, both ONSs over the course of the last cycle, a number of which relates to comments that we discussed at the beginning under item 7, where we were looking at ONS from the last cycle. There are 2 recommendations to adopt those various issues formally. But before I do, are there any further speakers on the item in question? Okay, seeing none, I'll move to the recommendation. It is recommended that the Executive A considers recommendations received from ONS committees as set out at paragraphs 4.2 and 4.3, following acceptance or rejection of these recommendations, which I believe they were all agreed. And B, approves the implementation of the proposals as set out in Annex 1 from the 1st of April 2022. Can I have all those in favour, please show? Thank you, everyone. Right, this one might take 2 seconds, might take 2 hours, depending on how people feel about it. It's an item that continues to generate lots of time and effort and expend a great deal of energy on behalf of councillors and also officers. Community governance review, towns and parishes in the Waverley Borough Council area. As many of you will have no doubt observed over the past few months, we've been subject to a local government commission boundary review. That's something that's undertaken by law and completely outside of our control, whether they do it or not. We have had the recommendations from that boundary review. Alongside that review, we were considering as a council to look at a community governance review, and by which I mean that we're looking at the ward boundaries of the towns and parishes within the Borough of Waverley. We have had multiple comments from those towns and parishes, particularly from Godalming and also from Farnham, as well as a number from other parishes such as Whitley and Busbridge and Cranley. We are here seeking authorization to conduct that review and to go out to the second stage of consultation as outlined in the recommendations. The bit I would probably highlight before moving on is the recommendations from the boundary review for towns and parishes maintained, I believe it's called Hatch Ward in Farnham, which none of us understand, and an equally baffling Croft Ward in the Godalming area that none of us understand either. And in the main, where we've got those kind of issues, the larger town councils were seeking to make their town and parish boundaries and wards coterminous with that of the new borough boundaries, which I think makes absolutely eminent sense. Are there any any comments on this particular item before I move to a speaker? Okay, Councillor Hyman, you've registered to speak on this one.
Well, thanks. Yeah, it's just I haven't found the officer report particularly clear on the bit that I'm interested in, and I think there's a lot of other councillors are interested in, which is it the intention that this consultation will enable us to align our ward boundaries with the joke that we've just had through from the Boundary Commission? I mean, just a simple example from Farnham, that the new Borough Castle ward will be almost completely different from the old Borough Castle ward, apart from a very small part of the town centre. And so if we've got a parish councillor for Castle Ward, they will be covering a completely different area to the Waverley councillor for Castle Ward. So we've got two different Castle Wards that that our residents are going to have to try and get used to the idea of, which seems mental, frankly, as far as I'm concerned. But is this about aligning things by June and then September, and hopefully by the end of the year we'll know how many councillors we need to be lining up for next April, which is the I assume the same position in other areas of the borough, although I haven't had time yet to go into that in detail. So is this all about aligning them, the parishes and the boroughs, and what are the chances that that we can do so, or are we in a position at the moment where we have to accept that we're going to have completely different boundaries for wards and strangely conflicting names, and some places written off of the map completely, no, Upper Hale and Hale no longer exist, and that sort of thing. I'm not entirely certain, but can you confirm that I'm right in my way of thinking this is us trying to line things up? And what chance of success do officers expect that we'll have if we carry on doing this? Thanks.
Thank you, Councillor Hyman. This is one of those few areas where I can agree with you almost completely and answer in a very positive, useful way. So in the first instance, the chance of success is 100% because Waverley conduct this and Waverley approve it. We don't have any control over the local government boundary commissions element for the borough boundaries, but in terms of the town and parish boundaries within Waverley, that is actually for Waverley to set. So we can, once we've agreed what it is that we're going to do, we can enact that. So the chance of success is 100%. I'm just absolutely looking over to the monitoring officer to confirm I've not misrepresented that, but just to confirm.
No, not at all. I mean, the point here, Leader, is that this is the Borough Council's process rather than the Boundary Commission's review of the borough boundaries. So it's a different thing.
As to your second point, Councillor Hyman, yes, for example, Farnham has requested that the town wards be coterminous with the borough wards, and so has Godalming. But there are a few other things that parishes have requested throughout Waverley. One, for example, I think is Whitley Parish Council was proposing to change its name to Milford and Whitley Parish Council, and a few others have requested other minor changes to their wards or a reduction or increase in their number of town or parish councillors, for example. So there are a number of things it does or can do. And effectively what this process does is go through the second stage of consultation to make sure that's actually what everybody definitely wants. And then to make sure that the Borough Council agrees with and can enact those changes, at which point I believe it's actually agreed by full council. And yes, you're quite right. The intention of this is to get it all so that it is lined up and all done so that both sets of changes, the Local Government Boundary Commission and our governance review, are done at are implemented at the same time for the 2023 all-up elections. Because as you say, many of the things they're suggesting are absolutely mad.
Is there anything, sorry, can I just say, is there anything to stop us, if you can clarify, is there anything that can stop us legally or whatever from aligning, through this process? So that's I suppose what I was really trying to ask.
I don't believe so, but I imagine hypothetically a parish that fundamentally disagreed could probably trigger a judicial review or something crazy like that. I wouldn't be completely surprised if that were theoretically possible. But bearing in mind all of this has been done with direct consultation with the towns and parishes in question, I don't believe any of us would seek to do anything against the will of a parish. I mean, I've already been warned off by Busbridge about trying to annex them into Godalming, Jerry. So I mean, it's really just to stop the empire builders like me. But beyond that, I think that's kind of really the limits of it. So it really is in our own hands, and I don't think anybody here is keen to do something that's against the will of any of the towns and parishes. Councillor MacLeod.
I wonder if I'd just make a comment. Actually, what I find strange about the final report is they seem to be trying to use the town council wards, certainly in Farnham, to create an alignment with the Surrey divisions, which seemed a rather weird thing to do. Whereas obviously the borough wards are now don't line up with the Surrey division, can't possibly, because for things to line up with the Surrey divisions, number of wards have to be divisible by 3, because there's 3. In fact, they could have, if they'd started from the beginning and decided they needed 15 councillors in Farnham, you could have aligned the Surrey wards with the town council wards and with the borough wards, but they didn't do that. So I don't know why they didn't do that in the first instance, because at the beginning they said nothing about aligning with the Surrey divisions, and suddenly at the last minute, that was the justification for keeping 18 town councillors. So I just find the whole thing a bit bizarre.
There were a number of elements of it that I think are fair to say were a tad bizarre. In the first instance, it's clear that Surrey also need to look at their own divisional boundaries because they've not been reviewed in some time either. But the Local Government Boundary Commission did not have the power to review the Surrey boundaries at the same time as Waverley's boundaries. And as such, you've got some pretty weird things being suggested. I think I probably just need to stress that this is not about the Local Government Boundary Commission. We are pretty much at the limit of what we can do regarding those decisions, but we obviously have complete control over what happens at the town and parish level. So this is really to agree that the paper go out to the second stage of consultation, which if I can probably dumb it down more than I probably should, is really just to check everybody meant what they said in the first set of consultation, because this is quite a serious change and we want to make sure everybody is absolutely clear about what they want. And also just because there might be towns and parishes who missed the first lot, needed to have a conversation with their councillors and now want to do something that they previously hadn't thought about. So it's just that second pass. Really, there's the only kind of driver on this otherwise is time, because obviously the systems that need to be changed in the council are quite significant. And also if any towns and parishes need to make changes within their own, because certainly a town or parish as big as Farnham, Godalming or Haslemere or Cranley will have their own systems to change as well. And back to Jerry's original point, trying to make this as straightforward for residents as possible when they've got a councillor for Castle Ward in Farnham and they know who that is, and that's the same person for the same territory, because otherwise, as you say, sometimes somebody's got 3 different councillors in an area that might be called nearly the same thing, and it's difficult enough anyway without adding extra layers of complexity to this for no reason. So hopefully this is clear to everybody what this is. Are there any further comments from anybody? Okay, moving into the recommendations 2.1, which is in parts A and B. The executive recommends to full council that A, the method to evaluate the submissions made in the initial consultation period as set out in paragraph 4.4 are approved, and the submissions that are agreed to have merit are incorporated in the draft recommendations for consideration in the second stage of the consultation between the 3rd of May and the 10th of June. Can I have all those in favour, please show? Thank you very much, everyone. Item 16, pre-election period publicity policy. Let's see how I can introduce this without getting too political. I think we all foresee that in a multi-party council, the necessity of regularizing what might be considered custom and practice in the PERDA period before an election might be a very sensible approach, as it is possible and foreseeable that in such a multi-party coalition, there might be a greater need to have that written down so everybody understands it. It is in that aim that this document has been drafted by Democratic Services and is before you tonight. I think it is fairly clear what it seeks to do. Most of it is common sense. I think most of it is what people would expect to happen anyway. It is just making sure that it is all written down so everybody is absolutely clear what it means right across the council and at every party. I've got no other registered speakers, but does anybody else want to comment on this one? No, in which case the recommendation is, it is recommended that the executive recommends to full council that it approves the pre-election period publicity policy as set out in Annex 1 to this report with immediate effect. All those in favour, can you please show? Thank you all. Right, moving then on to item 17, which is exclusion of press and public. I am very sadly informed by the monitoring officer that I do not have to read out the full and lengthy paragraph from the Local Government Act when doing this, and I wasn't able to this morning either at the Joint Appointments Committee. So if all members are content to have read the notice in the document, can I have your approval to move into exempt session? Thank you all. We'll now pause while we do that.